of guys on YouTube talking about angular momentum on gyroscopes or spinning wheels hanging on one side of the axle. And we're going to debunk that, and I'm going to prove it to you. No doubt about it, I'm going to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt why you get angular momentum and why you get procession. Aha. And either Area 51 and NASA has known about this for decades. They just don't let the secret out, or I'm going to educate them too. One of the two. The mass of the wheel, the only difference it makes is how much power and momentum you have. The wheel itself out here has nothing to do with the angular momentum or the procession. It really doesn't, and I'm going to prove it to you here shortly. It all comes from the bearings. It's all in the bearings, the pivot point. It doesn't matter whether it's bearings or a sleeve, a shim sleeve, or if it's just a real thin disc, you're going to have a left and a right side. And I'm going to prove that to you here shortly. And this is just an 8-inch lawnmower wheel with an axle through it. Got a couple of eye nuts welded on the end so I can hang it. And it rotates pretty freely on bearings. And it gets a little noisy when I spin it up, and we're going to do that in a minute. I'm going to spin it up and show you. But what the problem that people apparently are missing is when you spin this and you pull the axle towards you, it twists. And it twists in the direction of the rotation. And I'm going to show you why that does that. Then, let me do that again. Spin it that way, twists that way, but the procession goes backwards to the rotation. If you notice that, it's rotating towards you now, but if I let go, it spins this way. Basically backwards to the rotation. I mean, you can look at it from either side and say, no, it's forwards this side, but it's backwards this side. But it's basically reverse to the direction at which the twist when you pull, the procession will go opposite. And I'm going to show you why that works and why it's the bearings that do that. Trust me, I'm going to prove this to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. Partly my theory, the good vibrations, copyrighted, but mostly it's just basic physics. And I've watched the guys on YouTube, professors and everybody, talking about the pressure out here on the outside of the wheel, pulling this way and that way. When it's up, it's doing this or this, and you push and pull. I'm going to prove to you that is not where it's at. Angular momentum, when it twists, when you pull on it, has nothing to do with out here. This is where your force comes from to make that happen, but that's not why it happens. And when you get it up and let go, the reason it processes opposite the direction of rotation is the bearings too, and I'm going to prove that also. So we're going to move on, and this works the same as gyroscopes. I have a gyroscope, but it's inverted, and we'll get to that in a minute. But we're going to move on with this, just one wheel, and I'm going to spin it up with an air grinder and show you a few experiments with that will kind of open your eyes to why the angular momentum has really not much to do with out here other than the fact that it's rotating. That's where your momentum comes from. Because if it sits still, I can do that. As soon as I rotate it, it wants to twist. And I'm going to prove to you it's not out here. It has nothing to do with out here why it does that. This causes it to happen, but that's not why it happens. It's the bearings, or a shim or shaft or anything in the center. It's where the rotating mass meets the stationary mass. Where they meet is where the problem occurs. And we'll move on to that. Okay, I've got an air grinder. I'm going to use it to spin the wheel up to a good RPM. I don't know exactly what it is, but you'll see it'll spin real fast. And I'm going to show you a few things about what I'm talking about. And by the way, the guards on my hands is not from this. This is from my day job. If you're interested in that, hit me up on this clip. We can talk about it, but it's not from this. This is the safest stuff I do compared to my day job. Okay, it's spinning, right? And if I grab both sides of the axle, bottom and top, I can move this thing. Look at that. It doesn't twist, you know, unless I move one opposite the other or a little off whack. But as soon as I pull straight towards me, it spins to the side. And when I let go, it processes, well, the best way to do it, the top side is rotating away from you, and it processes against the rotation on the top side. And I'm going to show you in a second why that does that. So when I pull up, it twists with the rotation. If I rotate that way, it twists this way. If I rotate this way, it twists that way. Okay. And no matter if I rotate this way, it twists that way, but it processes the opposite direction of the twist. And if I twist it this way, it twists that way and processes the opposite direction of the twist. I'm going to show you why that does that. Next, I'm going to show you, I'm going to do it right here now, is why it has nothing to do with out here. You know, anything pushing out here. It has nothing to do with out here. I'm going to show you that now. Let me run this up. Hang on a minute. I'm going to air grind this up. Get it spinning again. Now I'm going to take an air hose. I'm going to stand it up and let it spin like this. Then I'm going to use the air hose and I'm going to push, blow air against this wheel at different locations. And you're going to see that it doesn't make it twist like this. It doesn't make it process any different. It doesn't do any difference when I put pressure out here. Okay? So let me spin it up. Spin it up again. Okay, it's spinning at a good RPM. I'm going to get my angular momentum, get a twist, and get it upright where it processes. And it's processing. Now, if it had anything to do with out here, this air hose would twist it. But it don't. It just blows the whole thing. You see that? The whole thing moves. It doesn't twist or process any different. The whole thing moves. And if I hold the air long enough on one end, I can get it to twist. You know, I can get it to lean a little bit. And no matter how fast it's going. But it basically just goes in the direction the air is pushing it. So it's not got anything to do with anything out here. Because I can, as I just showed you, while this is spinning, if I blow air up here, down here, it doesn't twist. And I'm putting more pressure on the sides or the bottom or the top. I did all the way around. It just moves the wheel, just like it does when I grab both axles. Okay? So it's not out here. This is where your energy's coming from. This is your momentum, is your weight spinning. It's trying to sling out, and it's going to stay stabilized. And that's why it stays up like this, is because this is stabilized there. But the procession is because of the bearings, and the angular momentum of the twist is because of the bearings. And it doesn't have to be bearings. It's just where the center point is of the rotating mass against the stationary mass. Now, we're going to move on to a gyroscope, my inverted gyroscope. I'm going to show you basically the same things I just showed you here, but it'll be held on both axles. And like I showed you with this, let me do this real quick. If I spin it, I can move it up and down. It doesn't do anything as long as I grab both axles, right? But if I hold just one axle up, it processes. See what I mean? I can hold both sides, it don't process. As soon as I let go, it processes. I'm going to show you why it's the bearings doing that. The central point of the rotating mass and the stationary mass is what causes that. I guarantee. Now I'm going to prove even more, other than I did with blowing air against this. It didn't twist or lean because I changed the pressure out here. It just moved the whole thing, just like it does this way when I do this. But if I twist, you get a turn. Aha. And when I blow out here when it's up, it doesn't twist, it just moves. And I can stop the procession as long as I hold up on this side. I'm telling you, it's all about the bearings. It's all about the difference between the point of rotation on your mass and the point of stationary mass. That is where the problem occurs for angular momentum and procession. So I'm going to put my gyroscope up, my inverted gyroscope, and we'll do a couple things with it. Then we're going to move on to show you why this does this on both. And we'll do that. Okay, this is my inverted gyroscope. Let me explain it to you before you get all freaked out and such. Most gyroscopes are supported from the ground. And if you take this thing and flip it upside down, and I'll show you the difference of what I've got and what a normal gyroscope is. There's a post that comes up to a swivel. It's a bearing. And this rope up here is my bearing. I can swivel this way. Okay? And before I get to these, I'm going to go down here. And just like the wheel, it's on an axle, and it's supported by bearings here. All right? So we can do this, or whatever. The difference between a normal gyroscope and mine is these two cables are not solid. Be like if I had a U-shaped bar here with, you know, bearings here and bearings up here, it would be identical to a gyroscope from the ground up, supported from the ground. And I like using this because I can manipulate what happens easier with this than I can a regular gyroscope. But I'm going to show you that here before shortly. And like I said, NASA and Area 51 especially, they've known about this for decades, I think. If not, I'm happy to educate anybody. But this is my inverted gyroscope. I'm going to spin it up with the air grinder, get going at a high RPM, and I will show you what that does. And I'm going to blow air against it again, and you'll see. But what I'm going to show you right now, if you notice when I spin this, there is no procession. I mean, maybe a little bit because it's bouncing. But the point is, the reason there is no procession is because it's equally held on both sides of the axle. Both bearings, the weight of the wheel is on the top of the bearings from both sides. So the center point is rotating on the top side of the stationary and the top side of the rotation piece, mass. That's why there's no procession. But if I spin it and I pull up on one side, it processes. If I pull up on the other side, it processes the other way. I'm going to show you why. It really doesn't have anything to do with anything out here. It's all about the bearings or the place where the rotation mass meets the stationary mass. That's where your problem comes from on angular momentum or procession. And I can pick this up with both sides equally, and it just comes up. It don't twist. But if I pick up on one side, it spins. And I'm going to show you, again, it has nothing to do with out here. Out here is the energy or the momentum that makes it do that, twist. Because if I pull up on both sides, it doesn't twist. Look at that. And I can move it forward, backward, side to side, and it really don't care. But I can't do that by pulling up on one string. If I pull up on one side, it twists. If I pull up on the other side, it twists the other way. And it's up here is where your rotation is. So, that's my inverted gyroscope. If you want to argue about, you know, these not being a solid thing, hit me up on this clip and we'll argue about it. But other than that, I'm going to move on to spinning this up with the grinder. I'm going to blow the air against it. You'll see what happens then. And do a few more experiments with it spinning at a high RPM. And then we'll move on to why both a gyroscope and a spinning wheel display angular momentum and procession. And we'll move on. Okay, there's my inverted gyroscope and my air grinder. I'm going to spin it up and do a few demonstrations to show you what I'm talking about. So it's spinning, right, high RPM. If I lift up a little bit, I can move it this way or this way. I can do whatever. I have to do it with the axle or with the wire. Swing, 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 whatever. But if I pull up on one, it processes that way. If I pull up on the other, it processes that way. Oh my God. Now, if I twist up here, it's just like a gyroscope, and you push forward on the bowling, piece that goes down. If I twist, it leans. I may turn it toward you so you can see. If I twist, it doesn't rotate, it leans. All right? That's cool. We all know that. I'm going to stop it and I'm going to show you why. When I twist it, this one's pulling forward, this one's pulling backward when I twist it that way. But instead of it rotating like it does now, see how it rotates? Oh my God, the reason it doesn't rotate when it's spinning, it leans, has nothing to do with out here. Out here is your momentum, your energy. It's because of the bearings. And I'm trying to tell you, this is the same thing that happens when you have a wheel leaning on one side, a wheel spinning with one axle supported. It's the twist of the bearings. Out here is your energy, your momentum, your driver. But down here is the reason you get angular momentum on spin or procession. Now I'm going to spin this up again and blow it with air from side to side and show you the same thing I showed you with hanging with one axle supported. It's going to do the same thing, and I'm going to show you so you see. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to spin it up again. And it's spinning real good. I'm going to turn it. I'll grab the axle here, pick it up, and spin it wherever I want. And I'll take my air hose again and blow. And it doesn't matter which side of it I blow on, the whole thing moves. Now if I keep it on it long enough, I'll give it a little twist. And it doesn't matter which direction. Let me turn it this way. And I'll blow it from the front. And it goes away. Side, side, top, bottom, top, bottom, side, side. It doesn't matter which direction I push against the rotation with the air current. Push the top, push the bottom, push the sides, it's just the whole thing moves. And I'm going to show you why next. It has nothing to do with out here or out here. It has to do with right here in the bearings. That's where your angular momentum comes from. That's where your procession comes from. And that's why you get no procession when they're hanging equally from the top. And we'll move on and I'll show you how that works. Okay, I think I've showed you by blowing air against this when it's spinning, the angular momentum when it twists, or the procession after it's up on one hanging on one side, a wheel hanging on one side of the axle, is not from out here. This is where your energy comes from. It's the bearings. So let me show you how I've got this set up to show you. First, we know we've got a right bearing and a left bearing. There's two bearings. And this will work with just one bearing, or even if you just have like a shim or something, you know, like a race that the wheel's going around, something like this, it's not actually a bearing, but the same principle will apply. Okay, I've got 4 ball bearings here mounted to this piece of wood, and what they're going to demonstrate is here's a bearing, like on our wheel, and it rotates. But when we look at these, this is 2 bearings. This is going to be our right and our left. We're going to turn this way. So we got a right and a left, okay? And this little shaft has got 2 bearings on it to give you the idea of what I'm talking about here. So our wheel is in the middle, in between here, okay? And each of these bearings is going to represent, you know, the one on top and the one on bottom over here, and the one on top and the one on bottom over here. But as a bearing rotates, they change position, you know. You're going to have a little bit of each bearing taking up the position of top and bottom as they go around. If you notice, when I spin it, they take turns as it rotates. You know, we all know this. My point on doing this is, let's say this is our axle, you know, going through our bearings, and this is extremely exaggerated, the distance, so I can show you. And I've got a round rod here, and that's our axle. But I'm going to change this out, this round one, for a flat one, because this one slides off too easy. So just imagine this is our round axle instead of this round one, so I can show you the demonstration. So our axle's through our bearings, sticking out of our wheel's in the middle. If you noticed, when it was spinning, even with whether I had 1 rope hooked or 2 on the gyroscope, 1 or 2, if I pressed up on both sides of the axle, it would just lift, okay? Or when you push down, it goes down, because you're putting equal pressure in the middle of the bearings, in the middle, you know, right in the middle here, in the middle of the race. And they're 3-dimensional, you gotta remember. So what I'm gonna show you next is a little different. Now, when you had the wheel hanging off of one side hooked, when you lift on this side, when you torque it up, the reason it flips with the rotation is because you're putting it in a bind. So when I lift up, I'm pushing on the outside of this bearing and the outside of this bearing on opposite sides. And then as the bearings come around, this one's going to be touching a little on the inside and this one on the inside as they rotate this way from, you know, the next position coming up. This is the bottom, that's the top, and there's bearings in between here coming around. So as this rotates, your pressure is different. So instead of it lifting up, it twists, okay? It twists it, it puts it in a bind. Even though our axle has no play in it, like I'm showing here, this is to exaggerate it so you can see, it's the same thing. No matter which way you lean or put torque, you get twist. So it's putting pressure on the opposite sides of the bearings. And since this is rotating this way, when you push on the outside more, it wants to push in, and this one wants to push in. So when they push in, they twist. They're pushing in, not just forward, see? We're not pushing just forward, we're pushing in. So the inside of the race is pushing against the bottom of the bearing, like here, and the outside of the race is pushing against the top. And it's pushing around all the way around the race, but the races are going to have whichever way you're torquing. If you're torquing up, you're pushing the inner race into this side of the bearing over here. And on the other bearing on this side, you're pushing down over here against that race. And that's what gives you your angular momentum. When that torque comes in, as they're pushing towards each other, because they're going this way, but you're trying to force them to go a different way, it takes a moment for them to catch up. So as they're spinning, you put that torque, they have to twist with the rotation because they're moving, and it twists. That's what throws the whole wheel around. That's the angular momentum. It's caused by the bearings. And like I said, even though this is exaggerated, it's the same principle. You're putting pressure on the races against the bearings. That's why you get the twist, angular momentum. Now, let's talk about procession. When you do the angular momentum, it goes with the rotation because they're pushing against each other equally on each side. You're pushing up on this one and down on that one. So they're equally going towards each other. So you get a twist with the rotation. However, when you let off, when it's hanging on one side, because when it's hanging from both sides in the gyroscope, it doesn't process. Only when you hold one side. So after you torque it and you let off, the weight of the wheel is still leaning over because you're only holding up on one side of the axle. So as the weight of the wheel leans over, it's got that torque backwards. You see, if I pushed up this way, it went with the rotation. Then when I let off and let it hang, the weight of the wheel on that side is going to do that. So then you're pushing backwards the opposite direction, so it processes backwards to the direction that it twists with angular momentum. Angular momentum is with the rotation, and the procession will go backwards. Because we reversed, remember? With the rotation, then the weight of the wheel laying down, and it's slower, backwards procession. It's just a little bit because it's just the weight of the wheel. It's just the weight of the wheel leaning on them bearings. So that's the difference. It's in the bearings. It has nothing to do with the outside part of the wheel. That gives you your energy, your momentum, but when you twist it or when you let it hang and it processes, that's why it does that. That's why it does it in the direction it does it. It's in the direction of rotation on the angular momentum torque, and it's reversed when the weight's off. Because when you do it this way, you're really pushing up on it. Then when the weight comes down, it's actually doing the opposite, see? When the weight of the wheel's over here, where there's nothing hanging on the axle, it's going to pull, see? But I lifted on this side to make the twist. Then when it came down on this side, it processes in the opposite direction. So I hope you get this. I hope you get it. It's the bearings are what cause angular momentum, and they're also what cause procession. Laters.